Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello, everybody. This is Alex Stein on Mushing Radio. We are on KVRF 89.5 FM in the Mat-Su Valley. Our streaming site is radiofreepalmer.org. You can find all episodes of Mushing Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Dog Works Radio. Follow us on social media, especially Facebook and Twitter at Dog Works Radio. And of course, you can find us on dogworksradio.com. Usually I am not the one doing the introduction and am joining Robert Forto on this broadcast, but he is off on the Serum Run Expedition 2020. Right now, he will be joining this broadcast again in a few days, and until then, I'll be sort of doing this by myself. So, it is Friday night. It is the night before Iditarod starts. And although I'm not actually physically in Anchorage, I know that this is a very interesting time in Anchorage. This whole week is known as Iditarod Week. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. There are vet checks on Wednesday. The banquet where they draw the starting numbers was held last night on Thursday. Today there are a lot of individual events with different teams hold events for their supporters, and there is not a lot going on officially, although they do have the educational conference at the Lakefront Hotel, and there are always lots of people gathering there. One of my favorite things about Iditarod happens just probably in about 2 or 3 hours from now, which is when they block off the streets in downtown Anchorage, and they bring dozens and dozens of dump trucks carrying snow in, because the first part of the ceremonial start of the Iditarod, which will be tomorrow morning, goes right through the streets of downtown Anchorage, starting on 4th Street and then going on that big turn at Cordova where a lot of people either wipe out or almost wipe out. And then it goes down the hill and into the woods through what's called the Green Belt, down by the university, and then finishing up at Campbell Airstrip. And it's about an 11-mile journey for tomorrow. It doesn't count for anything in terms of time. All that matters is you have to actually start and then get to Campbell Airfield. And another cool thing that happens tomorrow is that there will be approximately 15,000 people in downtown Anchorage witnessing the start. Teams will go out every 2 minutes starting at 10 a.m. It's very exciting. There's a lot of noise. There are a lot of people there. As you go a little bit further down the trail, either down 4th Avenue towards that big curve, or in the woods or down by Campbell Airstrip, there are fewer and fewer people. So if you are going to be in Anchorage and you want an experience that has maybe not what feels like millions of people, but just what feels like dozens of people, there's plenty of places where you can do that. Since we've been on the air, there actually has been a surprising amount of news. So I want to get to some of that before we move on. One of the first things is that Jim Lanier, who is someone who has run the Iditarod many, many times, and in fact has the distinction of being the only person who has run the Iditarod in every decade that there has been an Iditarod. And he sent in his entry form to run the 2020 Iditarod, and it was turned down. The board that reviews the entries had some questions. Jim is a guy who has scratched his last few Iditarods. There were some questions about his health. There were some questions about him really being up to running a 1,000-mile race. So the Iditarod Trail Committee said, well, you will have to requalify. You will have to run your qualifiers again. And that's usually 2 300-mile races and then a 150 or a 200-mile race. And so Jim Lanier, rather than complaining about this, just went out and finished all of his qualifiers this year. And the Iditarod Trail Committee said, if you want to run the 2020 race, you can run the 2020 race. So he entered at a late entry and will be running the race. Now, for me, this is terrific for a number of reasons. One, Jim Lanier is a really good guy. He is someone who exemplifies a lot of the best things about Iditarod, and he's someone for whom the race means an incredible amount, and he has been someone who has been very important in terms of helping other people qualify for the race and really keeping a lot of memories of the race's early days alive. So it is fantastic to see Jim Lanier, who is a guy in his 70s, who really, if he wanted to, could just be taking it easy and sitting in a comfortable armchair, drinking a hot toddy and watching Netflix. But instead, he's going to be out in very cold weather and a lot of snow running a 1,000-mile dog race. And, it's just fantastic. He did really, really well on his qualifiers and got exemplary feedback from the veterinarians at these various races. So Jim Lanier is running the Iditarod again. Another thing that has happened this week is very scary, to be honest. And, I think that everyone is lucky that things have worked out the way they did. And that is that Jeff King, who is a fantastic dog musher and really just knows so much about the Iditarod, has run the race many, many times and has won the race 4 times. He was in Anchorage for a taping of the Iditapod podcast on Tuesday night, and he was not feeling very well and thought that it was probably just something that he had eaten or something like that. And then after the podcast, he was still feeling very, very badly and decided that he would go to the hospital and have this checked out. And it is a lucky thing that he did, because he had to have emergency surgery. I believe they said it was for a perforated intestine and a hernia. And so Jeff King is not going to be running the race. He is reportedly doing very well, in really good spirits, but is looking at a recovery time and rehab time of several months. So he very clearly cannot run a 1,000-mile dog sled race starting tomorrow. On the other hand, his dogs were all ready to run this race, and he had sent out all of his drop bags and all of his supplies. So the Iditarod Trail Committee had a meeting, and Jeff had asked them to allow his handler, a guy named Sean Underwood, to run the race with his team. And Sean had just completed all of his qualifiers this year and was planning to run Iditarod in 2021. And ordinarily, when you complete your qualifiers, you are not eligible to run until the following race. The one exception is if one of your qualifiers is a race that was not held the previous year due to weather. So if there was a race that was canceled in 2019 and you completed in 2020, you can still run the 2020 race. That is how it normally works. But the board voted to make an exception and allow Sean to run this race. It was a unanimous vote, and they voted that Sean could run this race and take Jeff King's dog team, which is great because the dogs are all set. It's obviously a different kind of thing because this will be Sean's rookie Iditarod. He is not coming into this with the decades of experience that a Jeff King will bring, but this is someone who is very capable and should do very well, especially with these dogs. I don't exactly know how to say this, but I'll just come out and say it. It's where you might expect that Jeff King could be in the running to win the race. I think it is just because it is his first race, it is extremely unlikely that Sean Underwood with these same dogs will be in the running to win the race. However, I think that he should do really well. He should have a great rookie experience. And the fact that he was able and willing to just jump in and run this Iditarod on a couple of days' notice is really something that we should all admire. He said at the banquet on Thursday night, he said that he has been planning to run this race. He's been thinking about it and planning to run it every day since Tuesday. And also, I should point out that Sean Underwood is not the same size and shape as Jeff King. And why does that matter? Because, among other things, when drop bags are shipped out, they contain dog food and things for the dogs, and obviously those will all be fine. But they also often contain clothing, different jackets, hats or gloves that might be of use in different parts of the course. And it's not clear that all of those articles of clothing will fit Sean in the same way that they fit Jeff. So I imagine that the past several days since Sean found out that he was running the race, there have been some emergency last-minute shipments that are being sent to some of these checkpoints so that Sean will have the gear and clothing that he needs, as opposed to trying to fit into Jeff King's parkas and use Jeff King's stuff. It is at the banquet. Sean said that when he told his mother on Tuesday night that he was going to be running the Iditarod in a few days, her response was, "No, you're not," which I think most of us who are males who have had mothers will understand that kind of reaction. Wanted to talk briefly about another thing that is happening tomorrow, which will be that there are Iditariders who will be riding in the sleds with the mushers. And the Iditariders program is one of the cooler things about the Iditarod and about the ceremonial start. Basically, people can bid to ride in the sleds for the first 11 miles or so on Saturday from the start on 4th Avenue to the Campbell Airstrip. And it's an auction, and the starting bids are $750, and it has a feature that's sort of like eBay with the buy it now feature, where you can just jump in and buy one of the spots in a sled for $7,500. So most of the Iditarod spots wind up going for a few $1,000s, and obviously the more popular mushers, the mushers who are very well known, the mushers who have won the race before, those Iditarod slots tend to go for a lot more money. But it is a good way for the race to raise money because, as we've discussed on this show many, many times, it is very, very expensive to put on a 1,000-mile dog sled race. While we are waiting for the race to start, there have been trail breakers on snow machines out getting the trail into place, making sure that there are crossings over all flowing water, making sure that there are trail markers in place, and generally trying to put the race into good shape. So that is going on. And on Saturday, the Iditaroders will get a chance to ride with the mushers. Everyone I've spoken to who's been an Iditaroder has said that it is a fantastic experience. It's kind of a once-in-a-lifetime amazing thing to do. For the ceremonial start, mushers will either ride in a long sled with another person on the runners with them, or more often, they'll use what's called a tag sled. So you have the main sled with the musher and the Iditaroder, and obviously the dogs in front. And then behind that main sled is what's called a tag sled, which is a second sled that has someone else on the runners, usually one of the handlers. And the idea is that you want to slow the dogs down. And I know that might seem a little bit counterintuitive for a dog sled race, but these are unbelievably powerful dogs. So you want to make sure that they are not running too fast for what really is just the ceremonial start and doesn't actually count in terms of their racing. So mushers have a choice. They can either use a longer sled and have another person on the runners with them, or they can have a tag sled. It used to be that there were a lot more longer sleds, but lately it seems that almost everyone uses a tag sled and then has a handler on the tag sled who also is braking and trying to slow the dogs down. So we're looking at a field this year of 57 teams. I counted 12 rookies, including Sean Underwood. And if I miscounted, I apologize. But I think it's 12 rookies. There are a lot of familiar names who are running this year. There are also a bunch of familiar names who are not running this year. We saw Didi Genro retired, and there are a number of other mushers who are very well known who are not running, but we do have a lot of very familiar names. We've talked on this show about the idea that the generations are sort of changing and we have a new guard coming into the Iditarod, and you're really seeing a lot of that in this year's field. Among other people, we have a bunch of champions racing in this race again. Jeff King is not racing, but we have Pete Kaiser, Yor Olsum, Lance Mackey, who has won the race 4 times, and Mitch Seavey, who has won the race 3 times. We have teams from Italy, Denmark, Norway, Canada, and the United States. And it is looking like it's going to be a very, very fun race. As I mentioned, there are 57 teams running the Iditarod starting tomorrow with the ceremonial start in Anchorage. And they have received their starting numbers, their bib numbers, which go from 2 to 58. And you might wonder, what about bib number 1? And bib number 1 is always reserved for the honorary musher. And that is someone who is very important to Iditarod history. or to Alaskan history. This year, the honorary musher is Gail Phillips, who was one of the earliest organizers of the race. She helped to run the Iditarod from her home in the early days of the race from 1975 to 1977, and also was on the Iditarod Board of Directors from 1975 through 1979, was a race coordinator for the Iditarod in 77, 78, and 79. In addition to that, she spent 10 years as a state representative in the Alaska House of Representatives, and this today is a board member for the Iditarod Trail Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to support the Iditarod and the Iditarod Trail Committee. So she will be going out as sled number 1, and then 2 through 58 are the 57 teams that are competing. The one thing I will say ahead of time about this year's trail conditions is that there is reported to be a ton of snow. Now, the past few years, maybe even the past 7 or 8 years, we have not had a lot of snow on the Iditarod Trail. And it is somewhat unusual that this year there are reports of massive amounts of snow. I saw a picture online recently which showed one of the trail breakers who was literally standing in snow that was up to his waist. So there's going to be a lot of snow this year. Now, what does that mean? Generally, that means that the race is going to be slower. So I would not expect to have a new speed record set this year. Because there's a lot of snow, there will be different kinds of stresses and different kinds of challenges for teams. So we probably won't see as many teams scratching very early as we did a few years ago when there was almost no snow for the first third of the trail or so. But we will see teams where the dogs get more tired. I anticipate we'll see a lot more drop dogs. And we'll see generally, I think, a lot more slow times. And we might see teams that will take an extra run or break up their run-rest cycle a little bit differently to compensate for the fact that there is just so much snow on the trail. I am doing something new and unusual this year. I have written 14 short pieces of fiction and creative nonfiction, which I am releasing one each day during Iditarod starting tomorrow. And so if you're interested in that, look for the hashtag Tales from the Trail, and I will be posting all of those. They're generally very short, about 4 or 5 minutes. A couple of them are longer, but most of them are in that range. And they are about dogs, mushing, and sled dog races from a variety of different and unexpected perspectives. This has been a lot of fun to do, and I think you guys are going to get a big kick out of it. So check that out starting tomorrow. We will be on the air and podcasting for the next 2 weeks. We will go all the way up until the banquet. We will be trying to cover all of the stories and personalities that don't get a lot of coverage other places. I know there's a lot of excitement about the front of the pack, and we certainly will be paying a lot of attention to the front of the pack, who is leading, who is doing really well. But we also, on this show, pride ourselves in paying more attention to the people at the back of the pack. I like to say that's where the best stories are. So we will be doing everything that we can to cover the middle and back of the packers. As always, we look forward to hearing from all of you. You can hit me up on Twitter. I am at Coldfoot Films, and I tend during the Iditarod to be on Twitter a lot. So look for me there. You can also hit up Robert Forto, who is at Robert Forto. He may not answer you for a few days until he gets back from Nome, but we are both very responsive to people, especially during Iditarod. and for me, especially on Twitter. So please feel free to get in touch with us if there's questions that you have or suggestions for things that we should cover or things that you think that really somebody ought to cover. Please let us know. We will be back here tomorrow, and for the next few days, it will just be me, but Robert will be rejoining once he gets back from Nome. But I'll be back tomorrow with all of the stories of what happened at the ceremonial start, which is always a lot of fun. And then the real start, the restart in Willow, is on Sunday, and from then on, it's a very, very serious race. For those of you in Anchorage, please have a great time. Enjoy the ceremonial start. It is a big, fun party that is there for the fans and is really a wonderful thing to experience. And we'll see you next time.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From DogWorks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for DogWorks Radio. Did you know that Alaska DogWorks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska DogWorks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.